endo and your pelvic floor. Have you ever wondered why you have pain with intimacy or why your periods are painful since being diagnosed with endometriosis, or maybe there's suspicions of having endometriosis? Today I want to tell you why. So before we get too far into this, there's a large amount of reasons why endo is suspected to even be a thing, because years and years ago it wasn't a thing, but it since has become a lot more prevalent. Having painful periods, difficulty with fertility, becoming pregnant, and painful periods, pain with intimacy, difficulty with exercise, difficulty living your life. I mean, the list goes on and on. And what I want to illustrate here is I'm going to take some of this back to just some basic concepts. While there is emerging research all the time, I think it's important to have a basic level of understanding of what's happening here. So first and foremost, the way I like to explain endo, and you might know even way more than what I'm explaining this level at, but just for simplicity's sake, here's what I want to say. Endo, or endometriosis, it's a mouthful really, but endo is such an pervasive disease. And while I have it, and I suppose you could call me an endo warrior, it is one of those diseases that comes at inopportune times, and it really can affect us, whether it's right before our menstrual cycle, during our menstrual cycle, after the menstrual cycle, or even sometimes all month long, or it's different how it affects us all month long. And I bring this up because when I'm talking about having pain or what endometriosis is, I think it's important to realize what else is happening inside the body. So before we go down that route, endometriosis, the way I like to simply explain it to my patients is it is tissue that is very, very similar to the lining of your uterus. And I say very similar to, it's not exactly like the lining of the uterus, but I think it's important to realize that the endometrium, the lining of the uterus, it knows that it needs to slough off every month. And if we have other tissue that's very similar, that tissue can sometimes be sticky. It sometimes can look black when they go in there and do surgery. And this particular tarry endolesion is what I like to call it. It can cause some of your organs, your pelvic organs, even some of your abdominal organs, to become stuck together, or maybe it can limit how well they move. Now, this becomes really problematic, and it's really a big part of why we have pain with intimacy, why we have pain with periods, and why we even have pain during different parts of the week during the month, separate from our menstrual cycle. So the first thing I want to tell you is that our guts are supposed to slide and glide on top of each other. But if we have a sticky substance, or this endolesion, that's not allowing these organs to slide and glide, that can create problems. And the reason that it creates problems is because, if you can imagine, as I'm leaning side to side, all of those organs inside of my belly, they're moving and pushing and changing positions ever so slightly. But if they're stuck, now they can't move. And movement is so essential to our body. And so if my body's unable to move, typically that's when dysfunction happens, and that's where the pain comes from. So there is one of the ways in which we may be experiencing pain at different parts during the month, because of how those guts are stuck together. Now, a second reason we might be experiencing pain, whether it is with our menstrual cycle, can be because of our guts being stuck together. And the reason is because when we are on our menstrual cycle, our uterus is supposed to drop just a little bit. And when that happens, if those guts are not able to move and they're stuck, then that is going to, again, going back to the lack of motion, that's going to create dysfunction, which in turn is probably going to cause pain, potentially. So that's the second reason. And then the third reason is that if those guts are adhered to parts of the organs, well, what's to say that some of those organs couldn't be attached to parts of the pelvic floor? So if those pelvic floor muscles aren't able to move, then that lack of movement can contribute to dysfunction, and that could potentially lead to pain. Do you see a pattern here? Hopefully you do. So that's the third way, is that those organs could be attaching to parts of the muscles or even the ligaments, and that very well could be contributing to some of your pain. The fourth way in which we can have pain is just even having pain in itself. Our body, our nervous system, it switches over from the rest and digest to fight or flight. When our body is in fight or flight, it changes the way we breathe. And interestingly enough, when that happens, our pelvic floor doesn't get the pressure and the tension that it needs. I know that seems backwards, but it doesn't get that. And so as a result, that pelvic floor, even though it's just because of pain happening somewhere else, that pelvic floor, because it's not moving, it's not getting the load it needs, it creates dysfunction, and that dysfunction can contribute to pain. So when we talk about having pain with intimacy, if those pelvic floor muscles are not moving because they're not getting that load or that tension and they're not moving and the pain happens, well, if you think about what's happening with intimacy, with insertion, there is supposed to be the parting of the ways to allow penetration to happen. However, if those muscles are not moving, then dysfunction happens, and then pain most likely can occur too. So my hope is that you're starting to see this pattern that, oh my word, there is not a lot of movement here, and not a lot of movement's causing the dysfunction and of course causing the pain. Now, there can be a whole host of other reasons. If your guts are not moving very well, you can have constipation. Well, that constipation very well could cause pelvic floor issues or pelvic floor pain or abdominal issues. Oftentimes with endometriosis, there are a lot of hormonal issues that influence how our digestion works, which if we have some influences there, then that pelvic floor very well could be affected. And you can see how this is a cycle that no matter where you enter this cycle at, that a lot could be happening here. But if you take away anything so far, is that because there's the possibility that some of those organs are not sliding and gliding like they're supposed to, that can influence so many other pieces and so many other functions that we have. Whether it's intimacy, whether it's our menstrual cycle, whether it's just the mere fact of moving around and those guts aren't moving. And our body experiencing pain can shift our body over from rest and digest into the fight or flight, which changes the way we breathe, which changes the way our pelvic floor gets that load. So my hope is that you can see here, okay, well, if we can influence the lack of movement, then then we can kind of get ahead of that cycle or that chain reaction or the domino effect, however you want to think about it. And so the lack of movement is what I want to talk to you about today, besides laying down that groundwork. So that being said, I think this is something that you easily could take and say, oh, I need to go for it. I need to go get moving. I need to go work out. I need to do all these things. Or if you are currently in an endo flare, and if you are, I'm sorry, I understand how that goes. Then you're probably like, yeah, right, girl, there is no way I am doing this, which I absolutely understand. You're not going to do that either. So what I want to do is I want to present to you some options. So before you shut this off, before you write me off, hear me out on this. In this whole entire explanation thus far, I talked about how that lack of movement in the guts or even in the body, in the pelvic floor, in our digestive system, that lack of movement is what's causing the dysfunction, which can contribute to the pain. So that being said, we know that there is benefits to movement, right? There's more blood flow coming to the area. So if we're experiencing a lot of inflammation because of this endometriosis and the endo lesions, then that blood flow is going to help heal those tissues. With that blood flow, it also brings more oxygen. It also brings more nutrients, which allows the body to start taking care of itself. I'm not saying that's going to heal it and get rid of it entirely, but I think it's important to be mindful that our body is capable of doing a lot of things. We just have to be the ones that help it. So with that, what I want you to think about is that movement of any kind is going to bring blood flow. And remember that little series, that domino effect or that chain reaction? It's the lack of movement that created all of this. Well, if we can influence that lack of movement, well, could we limit that chain reaction? Could we limit that domino effect? I would argue yes. And I say that because I have seen this with my patients in the clinic for over 14 years, along with my coaching clients and myself included. So when I say movement, or when I say exercise, or when I say working out, it may mean something different to you than it does to another person that you know that has endo, and it probably means something different to me. That is okay, and that is the purpose of this. I want this movement, the idea of movement, to mean something different to you. And I also want to give you permission to let that movement mean something to you on different days, on different weeks. No matter where that's fitting in the month or how it relates to your menstrual cycle or your ovulation or what have you. The reason is because I want you to figure out, and I'm going to help you with this, what types of movement is going to be the thing that helps you the most with this, because it is probably going to fluctuate. So let me first give you a couple of guidelines, and then I'm going to give you a couple of options. So the first rule is I want this to be pain-free during the exercise or movement or workout or however you want to call it. And I want it to be pain-free after. What that means is that's pretty easy to take care of during, right? Okay, I'm going to do some movement. As long as it doesn't hurt, I'm good. But I also want you to be mindful of, okay, how can I perform this activity in a way, at least until you have a better understanding of how your body is going to respond, how can I do this in a way that I'm not going to have pain after? So that is going to take a little bit of trial and error. But here is the beautiful thing. This gives you an opportunity to become reacquainted with your body and listen to it, because I would be willing to bet for a really long time you might be mad at it. You might be frustrated at it. In fact, you may not even have been very good to it. I'm with you. I have said some very awful things to my body. But once I started listening and really started tuning in, I know this sounds kind of weird and a little out there, but I realized I needed more rest one day. And then the next day, even though I didn't feel great, my body wanted to move. And so this is my opportunity, my invitation for you to start taking notice here. The second rule is I want you to keep this low and slow. You may feel good and you may feel like you can do more, but again, going back to rule number 1, making sure that you're having movements pain-free during and pain-free after is huge. Rule number 3, the goal is that you are moving your body of some way, of some kind, most days. Now, that's going to look different. I've said this already, but what you're doing on Tuesday might look absolutely different than what you're doing on Friday. But if you're moving, remember, we now have that blood flow, which should help with that movement of the tissues, right? Because you're doing that movement. And if we have that movement, then maybe that lessens the effect of the dysfunction, and maybe that lessens some of that pain. So those are the rules I want you to think about. And of course, check with your provider before you begin any exercise routine, especially when it's new, as it's relating to endometriosis. Now, the next few things I want to share with you are just some ideas. I like to think of exercising with endo in 4 different ways. The first way is, well, I should say levels. The first way is being in the bed, or I like to call it hit the hay, which seems kind of funny, but I want to add a little bit of light, a little bit of humor to this, but hit the hay. When we say hit the hay, we think the bed. So this is the first layer. what types of movements can you do in your bed? And if you've had endo flares or you've been stuck in the bathtub, because that seems to be the only place, then use the bathtub too. What can you do in the bathtub? You can lift your legs. You can raise your arms. You can gently roll back and forth. It's not going to feel like a lot. Your brain's even going to probably tell you, oh girl, this is not even worth it. But remember, movement is going to allow that blood flow to happen. And remember where that domino effect and that chain reaction came into play? It was because of that lack of movement. So if we can introduce a little bit of movement that's pain-free during, pain-free after, that's low and slow to start, and that it's movement of some kind most days, well, hot dang, then we are on our way. So that's the first level to kind of give you some ideas. And if you're like, well, I don't know what to do, roll over and then roll back and move your arms, move your legs, move every joint of your body. That is going to also help. It's not going to feel like it, but again, you're trying to figure out what your body needs. And on the flare days, this might be super helpful. The next exercise, the step up, is mop the floor. I know. Humor here. So mop the floor, meaning that you are going to be doing something on the floor. Now this could be done in the bed too. It doesn't have to be done in the bed, but you are on all fours. Maybe you're kneeling. So if you're kneeling, could you just sit there and move your elbows up and down? Could you raise your arms up and down? Could you wiggle? Could you dance in that kneeling position? Could you be on all fours and be crawling? It doesn't really matter, but again, think about, okay, well, what could I do here? Maybe even turn on some music and move to that. But that would be the next level. That's going to be a little bit more taxing than being in hit the hay in the bed. So you're on the floor, mop the floor. You're still on the floor. You're just not standing yet. So different positions. Then exercise 3, the third level. The next is strut your stuff. So with that, I want you to really think about, okay, well, if I'm nope, I said that wrong. Third is standby. I apologize. So standby, I think of like the movies or something. Standby. This is where you are standing. So with this, I want you to stand there. What can you do in standing? Can you do some mini squats? Can you do some bicep curls in standing? Can you when I say bicep curls, no, not even any weight. I never mentioned weights. I never mentioned any exercise equipment. Could you turn on some music and gently sway to it? What could you do in standing? And then exercise level 4 is strut your stuff. And this is where we're doing a lot more movement. Is this maybe where you're doing walking mini lunges? Is this maybe where you are dancing with a little more energy than what you were in the standby? Is this something where maybe you're actually going on a walk, like you're moving, like you're covering ground? It's a lot more motion than anything else. Now, if you're listening to this and you're saying, please, I don't need any of that. I work out just fine. Great. First off, I am so glad for you. I'm so glad that your body is responding. I like to bring these particular exercise levels up because I have found that sometimes the flares come and we don't know what to do. And I've had patients before, myself included, where we've been very active and life was fine. And as long as you push through it, everything was fine. But sometimes there are days that it is just really hard to move. And then you fall into that slump. And then, well, if you didn't move the previous day, it's harder to move the next day. And if you didn't move that day, it's even harder to move the day after that. And it kind of becomes this perpetual cycle that doesn't get you where you need to be. And if you remember, the lack of movement could be contributing to that dysfunction of the tissue, which in turn is where that pain is going to come from. So if we can have that movement, that will make such a big difference. So my hope is that this helped you in some capacity. My hope is that it has given you hope. And my hope is that as you're sitting here listening to this and you feel like you've tried all these things and you feel like it's not working, my hope is this gives you at least some sort of framework to start. And if you are in the hit the hay exercise level and you are only moving your body in bed, great. That is more than what you were doing yesterday and probably more than you were doing the day before. Progress does not have to look like you're going to the next level and you're going to the next level. Progress might be just being consistent and not having pain. What would that feel like? I encourage you to try. Now, I also encourage you to sign up for a Your Pelvic Floor's Next Step call with me or to fill out the form. I have lots of different offers and different ways to work with you if you're interested in working together. But either way, whether it's relating to pelvic floor, whether it's relating to endo, I have some options. But I also want to give you your next step for free on me because I truly believe that you deserve this particular help, and I would love to be able to give it to you. And remember, you're an heiress and a queen and everything in between. See you next time.